and a very good evening to everyone. And, well, I've been waiting for an opportunity to say this. Pinch Punch first of the month. Long gone are the days of September. Was it September? I can't remember. They all go too fast. Anyway, welcome to the Thursday night TechnoClub's live stream. And today I thought we'd do a little bit of game development, but in a genre that's not seen much love recently. And that genre is making a train simulator. So for that, I'm going to go to my old favourite, arcade.makecode.com. Just put on the link in chat. And if we go to new project, we can make ourselves a lovely little train simulator. And before that finishes loading, I'm just going to hide that. It's always slow on this computer. We don't need to use the simulator just yet. So, what do I mean by train simulator? Train simulator games are pretty much all about being able to either drive a train or build a train network and have trains run on it. You know, design your own train service. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose the latter option of making a game where you can actually design your own train tracks, so to say. You know, you can plot it out, and you could build your own Arriva Trains Wales if you wanted to. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a train sprite. If we go to sprites, and we can use the set my sprite to sprite of kind player. I'm not going to call it my sprite because who's going to remember that? I'm just going to click the drop down arrow and rename the variable. And I'm going to give it a much better name, something like, I don't know, train. And if I click in here, I can edit the image. So I could draw a train if I wanted to. You know, I'd do it. You know, you'd have the cab and then you have the engine and so on. But, you know, I'm feeling lazy today. I'm just going to grab something from the gallery. I don't think there's any trains in the gallery. Let's see. No trains. Oh well, we'll just use let's use a purple car instead. That's going to be our train. It's a car, but let's just call it a train. Of course, if you've got spare time, you could always, you know, make a nice sprite yourself. So we got our train. What else do we need? Well, we're going for the sort of build your own train network type of train simulator. So we're going to need a tool that lets us draw the track, a drawing tool. And we're going to need a sprite that represents that. So I'm going to go to sprites again, and I'm going to create another sprite. And of course I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this the draw tool. And yeah, let's just give it a quick sort of placeholder at the moment. Let's go gallery actually, and let's load up this duck. We're going to replace the draw tool in a bit. We just need something so we can see what we're doing first. But we're going to replace that duck with something else when we come back to it. Now, there are two more things to do before we can start. We can finish setup. We will need the camera to follow the draw tool, the duck, just so that we can see when we go off the side of the screen. If we go to Scene and scroll down to the bottom of Scene, we can have the camera follow a sprite. So camera, follow sprite, and we want it to follow the draw tool. So click the drop down arrow and change that to draw tool. And yeah, one last thing before we can start moving the draw tool around. It's probably nice to set a background. If I open this now, it'll take ages to open, but you'll see that the background is just black. Let's change that to a more suitable color. Like, they usually build train networks on large, flat, open spaces, so maybe let's have green for grass. If I go to Scene, we can set background color to, and I'm just going to choose a lovely green. And when that loads in, we can see we've got lovely green background, and we've got two sprites, and at the moment they're stuck on top of each other. They're not doing naught. So we should probably get one of them moving. We're going to get the draw tool moving, but we need to think carefully about this. Where do we want our tracks? Do we want them just all over the place, higgledy-piggledy? Or do we want to make them a little bit neater? And, well, the answer is neater. We're going to make sure the draw tool could only move as a grid. It can only move in grid. It can't just go wherever it wants. It stays in a nice, orderly grid. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the controller menu, and I want it so that when you press up, the draw tool jumps up one grid space. When you press left, it jumps left one grid space. When you jump right, it jumps right one grid space, and so on. So let's grab the on button pressed block. And we're going to change that from the A button. We're going to change it to, let's do left first. So when the left button is pressed, we want our draw tool to jump left. And we can do that by changing its X value. If we go to sprites and we scroll, we can find this option under physics to change my sprite X by a certain number. And that's the one we are going to use. And we're not going to change my sprite because that doesn't exist. I'm going to use the drop down arrow and change that to draw tool. And we are going to change the X by -16. Remember in MakeCode Arcade, it's minus to go left, minus to go up, positive to go right, positive to go down. And X is left to right, Y is up to down. So I'm going to change X. I need to go left. Left is minus, so -16. And yeah, let's just do right as well. So to do what happens when the right button's pressed, I'm going to grab the whole block. I'm going to right click and I'm going to duplicate. What happens when you press right? Well, we change the draw tool's X position by 16. Not -16, we're going right this time, so it's going to be +16. Let's see that in action. So now I've programmed left and right. As soon as I press right, it jumps one grid space right. Another grid, another grid, another grid. Left as well. It doesn't move smoothly. It moves quite jaggedly. But that's exactly what we want. Now, if you wanted to make your grid larger, you can always change the 16s to be 32s. Or if you want to make it smaller, you could change it to 8s. And notice how it either doubles or halves, depending on whether you want to go larger or smaller. So we've done left and right. Let's do up and down as well. So I'm going to go to controller again. And I'm going to have on button pressed. And I don't want this for the A button, I want this for the up button. And if X is left to right, we then want up and down. So what's up and down? Up and down is Y. We want to change the Y position of the draw tool. I can't speak today. Draw tool. Tool? Such a difficult word for some reason. Anyway, let's go sprites. And we're going to go down into physics. And we're going to change my sprite. And I know it says X there, but we can use that drop down arrow to change it. Let's change my sprite. Let's change that to draw tool. And we want to change its Y position rather than its X position. So make sure that goes to Y. And this is going up. So what is the best option for going up? Well, going up is minus, so we're going to change that to minus 16. And if I duplicate this and change that to right, not right, down, we can move down if we change Y by positive 16. So using these four move operations, we can move our draw tool, in this case the duck, in a nice grid-like fashion. I know it looks a little bit confusing. It looks like I'm moving the car, but no, I'm moving the duck. And it's the duck that's saying centered in the screen because we told the camera to follow it. Anyway. So, what's the point of our duck? The point of our duck is the duck is going to go around controlled by the player, and the duck is going to, when we press a button, deposit a little bit of train track. And that little bit of train track is going to be what the train travels on. And we're going to have the train follow the train track in the order that it's drawn. So let's start by designing some train track. So I'm going to do it a little bit weirdly. I'm not going to make a train track sprite. Because if you imagine we are creating lots of pieces of track, we don't want to create lots of sprites. We just want to create a sort of list of pieces of track. So I'm just going to design the image of the track now. I'm not going to design the sprite of the track. And to do that, we're going to go to variables. And we're going to make a variable. And this variable is going to be the image of the train track. So I'm going to call this track image. And what we want to do is on start, we want to set the track image to be the image of a piece of train track. So if we go to variables, we can set track image to 0. We can put that at the start of onStart. Well, that gives us nothing. It just gives us 0. We need to give it an image. And the easiest way to do that is to take your mouse on a stroll over to Advanced in the panel on the left. And one of the menus there is Images. And in this panel, you can find everything to do with images. We want to create an image. And so in the Create tab, you can find this big oval with a blank image inside it. And that's what we want. We want to set the track image to a blank image. And now we can design it. And so to design it, I'm going to click in there and I can draw some train track. Now, you can make this as wild as you like. You can have sci-fi rails, you can have, but you can make it some road if you're not into trains, you know, a little bit of tarmac. I could do it as that, and then you know, I could do the lines across like that. It's truly up to you. I am going to make a piece of track because who doesn't love trains? So yeah, let's do horizontal track first. Misdrew that. Have I miscount? Yeah, I've made a mistake. I meant to leave 2 gaps. Obviously, too perfectionist. And well, we don't have any grey for the actual rails, so I'm going to use this kind of purple colour because it's close enough to grey. There we are, a nice little bit of train track. Let's click done. And there we are. Now, I said at the beginning that we were going to replace the duck for the draw tool. My reasoning behind that is we are going to get our draw tool to choose between many different kinds of track. You know, at the moment we've got horizontal track, but at one point we want vertical track, or we want a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn, and so on. And we need to be able to see what we are placing down. And to do that, I'm going to set the image of the draw tool to be whatever the track image is. And to do that, I could go to variables, and we can find inside variables the track image. And I'm just going to replace the duck with the track image. And to show you what I mean, if we go to the simulator again, the draw tool is now a piece of track. And it makes it obvious that I know what I'm going to be putting down next. I'm going to be putting down a horizontal piece of track. So we got the horizontal track sorted. Let's do the other tracks, other pieces of track. We should have it so that when you press a button, it changes what piece of track you're using. So if I press B, it changes to horizontal track. If I press B again, it cycles through to left-hand turn, right-hand turn, and so on. The more times I press B, the more different tracks it should cycle through. And I said the magic word of cycle. And in computer science, when someone says cycle, there's usually going to be a variable involved that keeps track of where you are in the cycle. And so that's what we're going to make next. We're going to make a variable that sort of counts how many times you've pressed B. So let's go to variables. We're going to make a variable, and I'm going to say times B pressed. It's a silly name for a variable, but it makes more sense. Okay. And what we're going to do is well, when we start the game, B has been pressed 0 times. So we're going to set times B pressed to 0. And we're going to do that in on start. And now we should probably say what happens when B is pressed. So to do that, we can go to controller. And we've got on A button pressed. Well, we need that, but we need to change that to on B button pressed. And it's going to shake down like this. If you press B once, you have horizontal track. If you press it again, you then get vertical. If you press it again, then you get a left-hand turn. If you press it again, you get a right-hand turn. And so on and so on and so on, until you've pressed it so many times you've run out of track pieces and it loops back to the beginning. So to do that, we're going to go to logic. And we're going to grab an if statement. And we're going to say if the number of times B has been pressed is 0, then set it to horizontal track. So if we need a comparison here, so to get that we need to go back to logic. We need an equals diamond. And we can say if times B pressed equals 0, well, we need times B pressed for that. So times B pressed. If that is equal to 0, then we are going to use horizontal track. So we are going to set the track image to be horizontal. And we've already written that up here, so I'm just going to go where we did set track image to horizontal track. I'm just going to duplicate that. And I'm just going to move it on down into the if. So if the times that B is pressed equals 0, then we're going to use horizontal track. What else should we do? Well, we should probably add 1 onto times B pressed. So we can go to variables and we can change times B pressed by 1. Right. Let's do the rest now. So B has been pressed once. B has been pressed 0 times, so we have horizontal track. Then we need what happens if it's being pressed 1 time. So if we click this little plus in the if statement, we get an else. The else isn't much use to us. So I'm going to click plus again to give us an else if. Then I'm going to click this minus here to get rid of the else. Because we don't need the else. We're using else ifs. So if times B pressed equals 0, we do this. Else if times B pressed equals 1. So to get that, I'm just going to duplicate the equals diamond. I can change that to a 1. And if times B pressed has been if B has been pressed once, then we need to set the track to vertical. So let's go variables. Let's go set. And we want to set the track image. So in the drop down menu, change that to track image. And we need to set it to a image. So go to images, scroll down, and we're going to grab an empty image out of create. And here we can draw our vertical track. So click on that, and I'm just going to do the same thing, but vertical. So we've got horizontal track for when you press B 0 times, and vertical track for when you've pressed B once. What happens if you press B again? Well, we should add one on to times B pressed. So again, I'm going to use the change times B pressed by 1. I'm going to duplicate that and stick it underneath. Okay, let's just yeah, what next? Actually, yeah, let's do that next. So this is all well and good. It's changing what type of track we are using every time we press B. But how does the user know what piece of track they're using? We need to update the image that the draw tool is using. We need to tell it to use the updated track image again. So at the very bottom of my on B pressed, I'm going to have it set the draw tool image to the track image, but the new track image. So let's go to sprites and scroll down all the way to the bottom of sprites. We can change a sprite's image. We can set the image to something new. So at the very bottom of on B pressed, outside, as in underneath the if statement, I'm going to set the image of the draw tool, and I'm going to set it to whatever we set track image to be, and we can find track image in variables. Let's test that out. Let's open the simulator. Okay, so I'm going around now as a piece of horizontal track. If I press B, I change it into vertical track. And that's essentially what we need, but we need to start adding in the corners as well. We're going to need 4 corners. We need to turn left, turn right for each horizontal and vertical. So one going left there, one going right there, one going left down here, one going right down here. Okay, so to do that, we're going to go back to on B button pressed. And we need to add more onto our if statement. We need 4 more else ifs. So I'm just going to click plus to get an else, which we don't need. Plus again, plus again, plus again, plus again. And then we're going to get rid of else, because we're not needing it today. And basically we're going to have in this one, if times we pressed equals 2, if times we pressed equals 3, if times we pressed equals 4, if times we pressed equals 5. So let's just duplicate that. Change that to a 2. Duplicate that. Change that to a 3. Duplicate that. Change that to a 4. Duplicate that. Change that to a 5. And in each of these, we need to also update the track image and do something with the times we pressed variable. So let's update the track image for when you press B twice. Let's just get rid of all this gubbins. Don't need that anymore. This is going to be a corner. So I'm just going to do a quick dirty drawing of a corner, nothing fancy. If you can get it to line up with the other sprites, which might take a little bit of going back and forth, and then it looks extra good. Let's do that. Ooh. Bums. Let's have that come out there. Nope. Oh well. Doesn't have to be precise or anything, it just needs to sort of look the part. Which that doesn't, but oh well. There we are, we've got a nice corner piece. I'm not going to spend too long drawing these because, of course, it takes a while. But I'll go on then. I do like my pixel art. I'm a bit obsessed with it. And yeah, I'll just make that a little bit neater. Okay, that'll do. That's enough. That's our left-hand curve. Let's make a new one for... actually, no, let's make sure that we add one on to the number of times that B is pressed. Okay, let's make another corner. So we've got this one that's horizontal turning left. We need horizontal turning right. So basically this, but upside down. Easy enough. Let's just rub it all out. So same thing, upside down. That means that. That means that. I'm not going to spend too long on these because otherwise I'll be here for ages. So they're going to be a little bit inconsistent and a bit ugly, but you get the idea. You know, it doesn't match with the ones I've done previously, but you know, there's such a thing as spending too long on something. So we've got that corner. We need to also update the times that B is pressed. 2 more corners. This is going to be... Oh, I'm colouring it all in pink by then. This is going to be vertical, turning left or right. So we've done that one. So we need to do that angle. Oh, it really boggles the mind sometimes. It's always better when you're doing sprite work to draw stuff out by hand first, just so you know what you're doing. I obviously haven't. There we are, close enough. And then we need that the same, but upside down. Okay, let's change the times pressed by 1. And let's make a new corner. And speeding along now. Gonna change that to be... No, we got that one. It's gonna be that one. No. Yeah, this is the one we haven't done yet, this corner. Okay, you get the picture. You can obviously spend a lot more time on that. But as this is the last corner, the last in our list of tracks, we are not going to change the times B pressed by 1. We need to reset it back to 0. And that will keep the cycle going and going and going forever. Because if we don't reset it to 0, we'll get it so that we run out of times that B has been pressed, and it'll throw a wobbly error, and it'll get quite angry with you. So we are not going to change times B pressed by 1. We are going to go to variables, scroll down, and we're going to set times B pressed to 0. And this happens on the last corner, the last time that B is pressed. And congratulations if you managed to stay with me all through that boring bit of sprite designing. But with all those in place, if I go to the simulator and I press B, we should see that it cycles through the different pieces that we can use, and it cycles infinitely. So our draw tool now has different pieces of track that it can use. And also you can spend a lot of time making the track a little bit neater than I have. Okay. So with that done, we can actually start laying some tracks down, literally. And the way we are going to do that is we're going to be a bit cheeky. We're going to treat the tracks as projectiles. They're not actually projectiles, but we're going to treat them like they are. So if we go to our onStart function, we can go in the advanced section to arrays, and if we scroll to the bottom of arrays, we can find this set sprite list to array of sprites of kind player, and it's at the very bottom of arrays. And I'm going to put that in on start, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a list of sprites. But I'm not going to call it sprite list because that's a terrible name. I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this our list of tracks. And these are going to be projectiles. So we're not going to set list tracks to array of sprites of kind player. We're going to set it to array of sprites of kind projectile. And basically we're going to have it so that every time you press the A button, it adds a piece of track onto this list so we know what we're dealing with, and it plonks it down on the map so we can see. So if we go to controller, we need a button that plonks down a bit of track for us, and the only button left is the A button. Let's zoom in on that. And we need to set it so that when we press A, it adds a piece of track onto the map. We can find that if we go to arrays and we scroll down, and in modify, in the modify section, we can find this one that says list add value blank to end. And that's what we want to do. We want to add every new piece of track onto the end of our list of pieces of track. So I'm going to grab that, and it's not going to be list. No, this is going to be our list of tracks. And we are going to add on to the end of that a new projectile. Now, this is where we have to be a little bit cheeky, and we have to kind of confuse and fool arcade.makecode, because it doesn't really want us to do this, but we're boss, we're going to tell it what it's going to do. So in sprites, if you scroll down into the projectiles section, you have the option to set projectile, and you could either set it to come out the side of your sprite or come out at a certain position. We want the last one. We want to grab this whole set projectile to projectile from my sprite with VXVY. We're going to grab the whole thing, but we're not going to put it anywhere. We're just going to put it in blank space because we don't want it. We don't want the whole thing. We just want what it's got inside it. We want this blue projectile from my sprite section. So let me extract that. I've taken it out of the set projectile, and I'm going to steal it and put it in the add value to end part. And now we can delete the bit that we don't need. So let me just show you that again because it's a confusing step. We went to sprites, we scroll down to projectiles, we got the second projectile red block, the one that says set projectile 2. We took it out. We don't want the first part, so we're going to steal the second part and we put it in our on A button pressed. Okay, so this is how we get track to appear on the map. So we need to tell it to place down some track, and if you remember, we store the track image in a variable called track image. Ooh, goodness me. I don't know whether you heard that, but some very loud motorbikes just went past. Made my table shake. Anyway, if we go variables, we've got in here the track image. We've been updating and changing and moving around the track image all the time. And so now we can put it in to create a new projectile. And we want that new projectile to appear at the position of the draw tool. So we're going to use the drop down menu to change that to draw tool. Now, if we give it a Vx and a Vy, there's a velocity, then our track is going to be sliding around and moving off. I don't know about you, but I've never seen train track actually do that. From as far as I'm aware, train track just stays still. So we need to make sure it has no velocity. So we need to change the Vx to 0 and the Vy to 0. So a lovely, nice long bit of block code. List tracks add value projectile track image from draw tool with Vx0, Vy0 to end. Goodness. Let's see that in action. Let's go to the simulator. So I can move around, and as soon as I press A, it drops a piece of track behind. So if I move sideways, I could draw track. What happens now if I wanted to do a turn? Well, I press B until I get the turn piece that I want. So let's put the turn piece in. Okay, then I press B again until I get the vertical piece. So there's my oh, what's happened here? So this is a little interesting thing. Projectiles are actually set to disappear once they move off the screen. So for example, I'm going to draw some corner pieces here. Just a load of corner pieces. I'm going to move off screen and then we're going to come back to this area. So I'm going to move down a couple. Let's reverse. Ah, no, they've disappeared. Let's do it again. Down a couple. They've disappeared. So we need to fix that. We need to tell all the projectiles to not disappear. So this is the more advanced part of today's session. We're going to do a little bit of trickery and we're going to say on the A button pressed, I want you to grab the last piece of track that you put down and I want you to set it so that it won't disappear. So, how do we get something to not disappear? We can find that in sprites. And if we scroll down to the effects section, there is this option, set my sprite stay in screen off. We want this block, but we want to change that property. Okay, so we want to set the sprite not to stay in screen, but if I click this drop down arrow, we want to change auto destroy to off. So auto destroy is switched on automatically for projectiles. We want that off. But how do we get the right sprite here? How do we talk about the last one that was added to the end of the list of tracks? We need to get the last sprite from the end of the list. And this is a little bit interesting. If we go to arrays, we can get a value at position 0 in the list, but that's going to be the first one. We want the last one. So list get value at 0, and I'm going to put it in to replace the mySprite. Delete that. And list doesn't exist. We want a list of tracks. So drop down arrow, list of tracks. So at the moment, this is getting the first in the list. We don't really want that. We want the last in the list. So how do we work out the position of the last piece of track in the list? Well, to do that, we're going to need to know the length of the list, and we're going to have to -1 from it. So let's find out the length of the list. We can find that in arrays. And in the read section, we've got length of array. And that was give us how long the list is. And that's not going to be list, that's going to be list of tracks. So that's how long the list is. But this starts at 0. This gives us the full number. So we need to -1 from this list. Sorry, from this length. So we're going to need to use the math tab with the minus. And we're going to grab the length of the array, and we are going to -1 from it. And we can now stick that in to the get value at part. So we're going to set the auto destroy property of the last item in the list of tracks to off. Bit of a mouthful, but that's what we have to do, I'm afraid. And if we test it out, let's give that a go. I'm going to place down some track, and I'm going to move off screen, and I'm going to move back, and it's still there. It's not auto-destroyed. Great. So, we've now made a lovely little piece of software, a lovely little piece of software that allows us to draw, track or road or anything that we like, and we can do it, we can do multiple different angles. That's the one I wanted. Ooh, these sprites are a bit rough, but I did them in a hurry. We could have it going down, use vertical again, and so on. We could do a loop. And that's all well and good. But wouldn't it be much more fun if we can actually get our train to follow these tracks in the order that they're created? Let's do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have it so that when we press the go button, it signals the train to go. So if we go to controller, we can use an on button pressed. block. And we need to find a button that we haven't used yet. We haven't used the menu button. Let's use that. When the menu button is pressed, we can have it so that, well, we need to tell our train to go. So we need a variable that we can say, okay, this is the variable that tells you whether or not to go. It's our signal. In fact, signals are very appropriate when it comes to trains. Let's make a variable. And we're going to call this the train signal. And we are going to set the train signal to, let's set that to true, because we want the train to go, so we're saying true. You should go. If we go to logic, at the bottom of logic, we can find the true block. And it looks like it shouldn't fit, but it does. We're going to set the train signaled true. That means it can go. So we're going to need a sort of function that's constantly checking if the train should go or not. And if we need something that's constantly checking, we need a on-game update block. If you head over to game, at the top of game, we've got on-game update. And in here, we're going to say if the train is told to go, I want the train to head towards its next destination. And its destination is going to be taken from our array that we made of pieces of track. So on game update, let's go. Well, we need to check if the train is allowed to go. So if we go to logic, we can grab an if, and we need to say if train signal equals true. So we need a equals block and get train in there. So if train signal equals, we'll scroll down to the bottom, get true. If train signal equals true, we can now put that in our if. We need to work out what piece of track we should head to next. And because it's temporary, I'm going to store that piece of track in a special bit of memory. I'm going to store that in a variable so I know what my target is. So let's go to variables. Let's make one. And this is going to be target track. Okay. And we are going to set the target track. So set target track to. We need another counter variable. We need to count how many times we've been through the list of tracks. So if we look back to our onStart function, we made a counter variable called number of times that B is pressed. We now need a counter variable to store in memory which piece of track we should visit next. What is the address of? What's the number of? What's the ID of the piece of track we are going to visit next? So if I'm going to go to variables again, using lots of variables this week, I'm going to make a variable. And I'm going to call this next track ID. And we need to set that to 0. And we're going to set it to 0 inside the onStart function. So on start, it sets the next track ID to 0. So what's all this palaver about then? Well, we're going to get the target track from the list of tracks, but we need to know which one we are grabbing from the list of tracks. So if I go to arrays, I can go into the read section and I can get value at 0. List get value at 0. We are not using list, so we're going to use the drop down arrow and change that to list of tracks. Okay, we can get value at 0. That would give us the very first piece of track in our list. But we don't want the first piece of track, we want whatever the next piece of track is. And if you remember, we made a next track ID, so we need to get the value at position next track ID. So we're setting the target track to whatever piece of track we can find that's next in the list of tracks. And what we're going to do with that is, well, we need to get our train to follow it. So I'm going to go into sprites and I'm going to scroll on down to, where is it? Where has it gone? Yeah. So in the physics tab, in the physics section of the sprites menu, we can set my enemy follow my sprite. Now, obviously, we don't have an enemy. We want the train to follow, so change my enemy to train. And we want it to follow whatever piece of track we are going to next, so the target track. Target track. And we can change how fast the train runs. If we click the plus, we can have it run at 100, 50, 20. Change that number to be however fast you want your train to run. I'm just going to stick at 50. What we're going to do next is, this is just a little bit of debugging just to make it make sense to us in our minds. We're just going to output something to the developer console, just so we know what's going on in the background. Let's go console. We're going to console log. And we can console log looking for track number. And then we're going to console log again. And in there we're going to stick the next track ID. And this is just to tell us what's going on in the background. Okay, let's do a quick look. Actually, I'll leave it minimized. Let's lay down some track. Ooh. And let's click menu. And if we look in the console, we can say it's looking for track number 0, and it keeps on doing that. Okay. So, I realised that I have gone over 5:30. So, sorry about that. Remember, if you need to leave, you can always catch up on previous co-clubs by going to technocamps.com, activity packs, scrolling down, and in Virtual TechnoClub Series 2, you can find everything that we've done previously. There's also Series 1 to go through as well. But that's only if you have to leave now. I'm going to carry on for a little bit. We're not too much longer, just 10 minutes or so. Just to finish off our lovely little bit of, well, yeah, self-driving train logic, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we've got our train heading towards the first track, and it gets to the first track and then it just stops dead. It just doesn't do anything else. What we need to do is we need to say, when you hit the first piece of track, you should then look at hitting the next piece. So we're going to need another if statement to tell whether or not it's hitting. Let's go to logic. Let's go to if. And we're going to say if the train overlaps with the target track, then go to the next piece of track. Find the next piece of track. So how do we check for an overlap? We can do that in sprites. And we scroll down to overlaps. And we've got this diamond here that says my sprite overlaps with other sprite. And of course, my sprite and other sprite don't exist. There they are. They've given us an error right on time. So we're going to change that one to train. If train overlaps with the target track. So target track. Okay. Now this is the next part where it gets a little bit complicated, a little bit interesting, but I believe you can all do it. And if not, always get in touch with us via the TechnoCamp's website. We can always give you a hand. We are going to say if we have gone beyond the list of tracks, if we've run out of pieces of track that we can go to, then head back to the first piece. So let's do that half of the if statement first. How would we say if we have run out of track? Well, we can tell we've run out of track if the next track ID is larger than the length of the list of tracks, -1. So I'll just write it out and it'll make sense when you see it. We need to compare whether a number is greater than or equal to, so we need a comparison. You can find that in logic. But scroll down in logic, and we've got a less than. That's close enough. I'm going to stick it in the if statement. We don't want a less than. We want a greater than or equal to. And it might be a little bit small to make out on the live stream, but if you look in the drop down arrow, you can find that the greater than or equal to symbol is the last one. Okay. We need to see, is the next track ID greater than or equal to the length of the list of tracks -1? So we need that variable. Let's go to variables. Let's find the next track ID. If the next track ID is greater than or equal to, next we need the length of the array. So let's go to arrays. And if we scroll down to read, we can get the length of the array. And we are not using list, we are using list of tracks. Oh, I've made a mistake here. This causes what is known as an off by 1 error, because the length of the array is not equal to the highest number of track IDs. So we need to -1 from the length of the array. So I need to go to math, and I need to get a minus block, and I'm going to put the length of array in there, and I'm going to -1, so change that to a 1, from the length of the array. Okay, so that's the confusing part over. Basically, all we have to do in this top part of the if is set the next track ID to 0, because we're basically saying reset, go back to the first piece of track. So variables set, which is at the bottom, set the next track ID to 0. However, if we still have many more pieces of track to go, we should just add one onto the next track ID. So if we go to variables, we can this time pick up change. We want to change the next track ID by 1. So that's the complex bit of train driving logic out of the way. I think we can go ahead and test it now. You can tell it's complicated because it makes the simulator take ages to load. There we are. So I'm going to do my usual. I'm going to lay down some pieces of track. Let's do a corner. Let's do some vertical. Okay, so that's our track. Let's click menu and see what happens. So it's going along, goes down, goes around. Oh, and it goes back to the start. So it's gone a little bit off rails, but you can fix that by closing the loop, actually designing a nice train network properly. And yeah, that is pretty much it. There are a couple of things that you can do to improve it, but they're nicely advanced. So if you look at the car now, or the train, you can see it kind of drifts round corners exactly the same way a train doesn't. A train doesn't drift. So what can we do to improve that? Well, if I go into my on-game update, if we look at the if statement, which says if the train overlaps with the target track, then move on to the next one. This little overlaps function, this happens as soon as it touches the next piece of track, which isn't really a good way of staying in the grid. It's not a good way of making sure you're only turning when you're allowed to turn. So if you want a bit of an advanced challenge, you could change this out for what happens if the train is exactly on top of the target track. And to tell whether something is exactly on top, they must have the same X position and the same Y position. So you can change this little bit out for a different comparison, which says if the X position of the train is the same as the X position of the target track, and the Y position of the train is the same as the Y position of the target track, only then can we move on to the next piece of track. That will fix up the drifting problem. But other than that, that is pretty much all. I'll just show you a small little interesting bug. If I don't place any track down, it's still remembering the positions. So when I press menu, it's not actually driving along track, it's just driving between tracks. So if you wanted to, you could fix that, patch that little bug. But other than that, I hope you've had a wonderful 1st of October. We're nearing the end of the year. And yeah, have a lovely evening. Goodbye.